Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the fourth and last session of Global Ethics Day Conversation Series 2022 by ACCA Pakistan. My name is Mohammad Shahid. I'm working as Business Development Manager at ACCA Pakistan. As I mentioned that we had some exciting conversation from yesterday regarding various topics related to ethics and overall changing dynamics globally. So for this last session of the ethics, Global Ethics Day Conversation Series, we'll be discussing around our topic, which is ethics and inflation. So before going into the topic and moving towards the agenda for today's session, let me reiterate that today's event and overall this Global Ethics Day week is being celebrated under the theme of ACCS, which is accounting for a better world. As we all know that ethics is very important for ACCA and how we as a finance and accounting professionals keep ethics at the core of our heart. This event wouldn't have been possible without the support of our partners. So to name all of the partners, before naming them, I would like to thank all of them, starting from CFA Society Pakistan, Pakistan Business Council, Center of Excellence in Responsible Business, Habib Bank Limited, Institute of Cost and Management Accounting of Pakistan, Lahore University of Management Sciences, Pakistan Institute of Corporate Governance, Securities and Exchange Commission of Pakistan, Pakistan Stock Exchange, and Sustainable Development Policy Institute. As I mentioned earlier, today's topic is around ethics and inflation. And we have some exciting speakers lined up who will be speaking on this topic. Firstly, we'll be moving towards two video messages, and then will be followed by a panel discussion, having esteemed panelists from across the sector. And at the end of the conversation, we'll be having a dedicated 15 minutes Q&A. And at that time, all the audience who are watching us live via Facebook or through LinkedIn, they can ask questions, and our esteemed panelists will answer to all those questions accordingly. And the session will be closed by our very own colleague, Taimur Behram Khan, Head of Business Development South, with a closing address. So before starting, let me have a quick overview around the first speaker whose video message is going to go live shortly. His name is Mr. Nick Pollard, who is the Managing Director, Asia Pacific at CFA Institute. So let's hear from Nick.
Hello everyone. On behalf of CFA Institute, it's my privilege and pleasure to express my heartfelt congratulations to CFA Society Pakistan on your 20th anniversary. This marks a significant milestone, and witnessing the hard work, dedication and resilience of the CFA Society Pakistan leadership and staff in supporting our members, candidates, stakeholders and each other through the years is testament to what makes our global society network one of our greatest strengths. What also speaks to our collective strength as an industry and society is our unwavering commitment to the highest possible standards and ethics. CFA Institute has long championed these values because we believe trust underpins thriving businesses and financial markets and promotes investor confidence. And trust can only be built through ethical behavior and an industry-wide commitment to values like transparency, integrity, candor, and putting the interests of investors first. This year, we mark Global Ethics Day on 19th of October, with a focus on using the power of ethics to build a better world. The theme of Ethics Empowered is particularly apt, as we explore the role of ethics as a force for good in an increasingly complex and globalized world. As investment professionals, ethical behavior goes beyond simply following laws and established rules. It is about knowing how to navigate ambiguous situations and putting the interests of investors first when the rules are unclear. Simply put, ethical behavior is about doing the right thing, even when no one is watching. And not just on Global Ethics Day, but every day of your professional careers and lives. I am excited for what the journey ahead has in store for us, and I am confident that the CFA Society Pakistan team, together with support from ACCA, our partner and co-organizer of this event in Pakistan, as well as stakeholders and the industry, will continue to deliver on its mission successfully. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nick Pollard, for your insightful message. And you rightly mentioned that being ethical is very important, even no one is watching, and not only for this specific Global Ethics Day, but 365 days a year. So moving forward towards the next video message, which is from Jamie Leon, who is the head of skills, sectors, and technology at ACCA. So let's hear from Jamie.
Hello everyone, my name is Jamie Lyon. I'm the Global Head of Skills, Sectors and Technology at ACCA, and I wanted to start by saying what a pleasure it is to be introducing this incredibly important event today on ethics and inflation organised by ACCA Pakistan, and also a big thank you to our partners as well for supporting this incredibly prestigious event. Global Ethics Day is such an important event in the ACCA calendar in all of the markets that we operate around the world. And that's because ethics has always been a cornerstone, really, that underpins what it means to be a professional accountant. It's enshrined in our code of conduct, and really ethics goes to the heart of our mandate as a profession to always operate and serve the public interest. But why is ethics so important now? And I think part of the answer to that question is really in relation to what's happening in the global economy currently. And if we just take a step back for a second and think about all of the challenges global society faces right now, ultimately all of these have implications from an ethical perspective, and of course they're all interconnected. You know, we could start with the obvious challenge around climate change, sustainability more generally. Obviously this is an issue that as a global society we have to continue to address, and each year there is a growing imperative for us, all stakeholders in society, including businesses, to act responsibly, to think sustainably, to really focus on how we can collectively reduce carbon emissions. And of course, recent events in Pakistan with the flooding are a glaring example really of the tragedies that will continue to unfold and prevail unless we act together to solve this huge existential challenge. Similarly, we're also at the same time seeing a number of very powerful emerging geopolitical risks dominating the global landscape. We have a global energy crisis to contend with. Obviously, that's been significantly impacted from the tragedy of the Russian invasion of the Ukraine. And that's having huge knock-on effects in terms of global food security, rising supply chain costs, and so on. Many markets around the world are also still struggling with the legacy of the COVID-19 pandemic. That in turn has exacerbated growing inequality and income disparities across countries, across regions, across different parts of society. And we also have deep political challenges when we think about the major economies around the world. Clearly there are challenges in terms of some of the relationships there. That's going to have an impact on global trade. That's going to have an impact in terms of reshaping global supply chains, and so on. So lots of long-term challenges, lots of short-term issues that we see right now. And that, of course, is all reflected in what is actually happening in the global economy. We saw the latest predictions from the IMF last week on global growth, which has been downgraded to around 2.7% for 2023. Now, that's the weakest growth profile since 2001, except for the global financial crisis and the acute phase of the COVID-19 pandemic. ACCA's own quarterly global economic conditions survey, that's a piece of research that we deliver with the Institute of Management Accountants every quarter, points to a pretty similar deteriorating picture too. Our latest survey, interestingly, suggests that business costs are at a 10-year high for respondents to our survey. And obviously, as a consequence of that, what we are seeing is a further tightening of monetary policy in key jurisdictions around the world to really try and combat that cost of living crisis that is really starting to unfold. Now, all of this context matters because conditions are difficult when we look across markets around the world, and particularly because that inflation environment introduces new ethical risks. And here's the link really. If we think about what is happening in Pakistan, currently we have an inflation rate of almost 25%. That's at its highest since the global financial crisis of 2008-2009 in the country. As you would expect, and clearly what we've seen is the Central Bank of Pakistan has tightened its monetary policy as well over the last year. I think we've shifted from interest rates at around 8% to interest rates currently headlining at around 15%, which is quite a dramatic change. We've seen a decline in foreign exchange reserves, and I think when we look at the global growth predictions for Pakistan for the next year, they're revised downwards as well to around 3.5% for 2023. And all of that really is coupled with the huge ongoing fiscal challenges that your country has. And of course, the flooding has had an indelible impact too, in terms of the risks facing your economy. We think about relief packages, we think about infrastructure spend, and so on. Now, all of that is going to put a huge pressure on governments. It's going to put a huge pressure on policymakers. It's going to put a huge pressure on businesses and enterprises, and it puts pressure on individual lives as well. So it's an environment where, particularly right now, we have to try and think long term. We have to think about how do we support sustainable and responsible businesses? How do we ensure good governance? How do we deliver appropriate management of enterprises? And above all else, how do we ensure good, ethical, responsible behavior? Because that's fundamentally important to ensuring a path to growth and responding to some of the challenges that we face right now. So that's why I'm delighted that you are hosting this very important discussion today. Once again, thank you so much to our partners who are supporting ACCA, and of course, all of our speakers. I hope you have a really rich and rewarding discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jamie, for your keynote address and highlighting the key challenges. And I believe you have already set the context of this today's last panel discussion for the Global Ethics Day. So moving forward towards the main segment of today's session, which is the panel discussion. So this panel discussion will be moderated by Ms Mehvish Walliany. Let me share a quick brief profile of hers. Mehvish has over 2 decades of financial sector experience with a focus on infrastructure, project finance, and debt capital markets. She has held leadership positions at various financial institutions, as head institute banking at Bank Alfla and chief investment officer at Infrazame. She is currently spearheading AlKaram Studio, one of Pakistan's top retail brand, as your chief operating officer. So without any further delay, Mehvish, over to you. Mehvish, you are on mute. Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah. Thank you, Shahid. Welcome, everyone. I believe our keynote speakers have set the tone for today's panel discussion. And I would just like to begin with a few comments about this year, 2022, which has been characterized by economic shocks one after the other, earlier emanating from the remnants of COVID, followed by Russian invasion of Ukraine. Pakistan this year faced its additional internal challenges of political uncertainty and flood-related devastations. Today, we're in the midst of multifaceted challenges of food insecurity, energy crisis, supply chain challenges, which are exacerbating inequality as well as income disparity. Pakistan in particular faces macroeconomic challenges of rising interest rates, declining FX reserves, and today, a recent sovereign rating downgrade as well. In the face of all of this, having sustainable, responsible businesses, good governance, ethical and responsible behavior become the necessary essential tools in our armor to respond effectively to the upcoming challenges. We are joined today for today's panel discussion by a diverse group of professionals from financial and corporate sectors, as well as professional forums and policymakers. I would start by introducing my first panelist, Abrar Mir. Abrar is the Chief Innovation and Financial Inclusion Officer at HBL. He is responsible for delivering digital data and inclusion agenda for the bank. Abrar has a proven track record of taking a concept from ideation to strategy, execution, and ramp up across a range of functions and businesses in multiple organizations. He has more than 28 years of diverse industry as well as functional experience within and outside Pakistan. Our second panelist is Ayla Majid. She's an ACCA Council member as well as the CEO of Planative and is also a member of Global Future Council on Energy Transition of the World Economic Forum. She has over a decade of governance and leadership experience across industries, including energy, financial services, pharmaceutical, and advisory. She's currently serving on many local and global boards and is an internationally acclaimed professional. My third panelist is Dr. Abid Qayyum Suleri. He's the Executive Director of Sustainable Development Policy Institute. He serves on different policy-making forums and advisory boards, including National Advisory Council of the Planning Commission of Pakistan and the Pakistan Climate Change Council. He's the convener of National Coordination Committee on Prime Minister's Agricultural Transformation Plan and a member of Board of Directors of the National Disaster Risk Management Fund. Earlier, he's also served as a member of Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council and a member of Finance Minister's Macroeconomic Policy Group. Our fourth panelist today is Mr. Ehsan Malik. He's the CEO of Pakistan Business Council. Mr. Malik has been associated with Pakistan Business Council since 2016. Prior to this, he was the Chief Executive Officer of Unilever Pakistan and has spent a total of 2.5 decades with Unilever in UK, Egypt, and Sri Lanka. Our final panelist is Ms. Naz Khan. She's the Chief Strategy Officer at K Electric. Naz is a seasoned professional with over 2.5 decades of experience, both across financial services as well as industry. Prior to joining KE, she has served as the Managing Director of Ex-Petroleum, CEO of KASB Funds, as well as CFO of Engrocorp. Naz has also served on the boards of several organizations such as Shell, PSX, Forgy Fertilizer bin Qasim, UBL Fund Managers, amongst others. Naz is currently also serving as the CEO of K Electric Venture Capital, a newly established subsidiary of K Electric. With this, I will now begin our questions. My first question would be directed towards Naz, Abid, as well as Ehsan, and I would request you guys to respond in this order. So for a developing country like Pakistan, inflation definitely needs to be addressed, stabilized, in order to ensure a sustainable growth and macroeconomic stability. What initiatives, in your opinion, need to be taken to control the rising inflation in Pakistan? And secondly, how can we keep ethics front and center in a challenging time like this? Naz, if we could start with you.
Sure. Thank you, Mehvish, and thank you to the organizers. It's a pleasure to be here and on this forum and on a very important topic. So let me just, let me just begin with an area which lies sort of squarely in with me in terms of the power or the energy side, because let's look at where some of the inflation is coming from as well, right? We have some of it which is imported, and then there's some which you have which is, let's say, supply side. Energy, as you know, for our power side, almost 45% of the fuel that we use for production of power is actually is being imported, and the rest is indigenous. So I think one of the key areas that needs to be worked on is ensuring that we move towards indigenous power production and indigenization of the fuels, because as you know that the power forms the basis for a lot of our other industries, for transportation, and that feeds directly into the level of inflation. So I think on that, the government is also working on that side, as is KE, I can say. I think, and the way to move towards the indigenous, and this is also moving towards the ethical side and responsible businesses where people are moving towards renewables, which we know is available in abundance within our own country. So, whether it's wind, solar, hydro. So basically indigenizing our power production. And I think the plans that are currently in place at the government level that they are projecting, we should be doubling or we should be moving away from, let's say, a 45% imported fuel. We should be bringing this down to about 20% in the next 7 to 8 years, if the plans of the government are to be, taken as they are. At KE, I know we're planning a 30 by 30, so we're moving 30% towards renewable. So that will start, it actually starts bringing down your cost of electricity, as well as it starts conserving your dollars as well. So, very good on both counts. And in fact, when I was looking at it globally as well, the electricity prices have gone up globally, but for Pakistan, it's a double whammy because number one, as you mentioned, the Russia-Ukraine conflict, that has increased energy prices. And then because it's imported and you're having to pay dollars, the rupee dollar element just makes it extremely difficult. And as an economy that is going to grow, you will not have adequate dollars unless you increase your export base, etc. So energy side is one very important side that we need to take care of. We at KE will also be looking to add close to 1,100 megawatts of renewables by 2030, including hydro. So that's one. I think the other side is on the supply side, which I think also needs to be addressed. And I think that's where the element of ethics and, one of the earlier, keynote speakers had mentioned about governance comes in. Which is commodities, basic commodities where you may find where there are opportunities and you find that there is hoarding, let's say. So, the commodity is held back, with the result that you see inflation within the sector, or you will find, wheat prices, paracetamol prices, or some other basic commodities, and the prices have risen. So I think that raises an interesting question, where does government step in over here to ensure that they can take care of that issue, by either, making sure they crack down on the relevant elements. I think one of the things we saw government do this time was, this time there was a genuine issue where you had floods. They actually opened up the borders and allowed, some of those commodities to come in. So I think that's another element that needs to be looked at. But governance around that, I think, is another very important element.
Very, very correctly said. If I could ask Abid to add to this as well. Abid, if you could also switch on your camera.
Yes, I'll be available on the audio. Due to this peculiar situation in Islamabad, I had to send my driver home early. I'm driving. I'll get the permission to just use the audio through Bluetooth.
Of course, please go ahead and drive safe.
When we are talking of ethics, I think there are a couple of ways one can look at the topic. One is this inflation is not going to be smoothened down, at least this year as well as next year. So the first ethical demand that is on the government is to remain transparent and speak the truth with the people of Pakistan. Not only this government, but all the other political parties. Whoever right now would claim that they would come in power, or they are in power and they'll take care of inflation in 2022, 2023, that is not going to happen. And our ethical responsibility is to speak the truth. The second ethical responsibility is as consumers. As consumers, we have to stick to Sustainable Development Goal 12, which talks of sustainable development and consumption. Of course, money is ours, but resources, they don't belong to us. And we need to actually stick to sustainable patterns of consumption. We need to consume only what is required. And in case of energy, we need to understand that the cheapest energy is the energy not consumed. While one can see that in UK, there is a warning of blackouts, energy blackouts. Germany has already gone to a recession. Even looking at France, where due to the strike of oil refinery workers, one saw last week the protest at the fuel stations. So this is the type of world we are passing through. And those who can consume, they need to think about before their consumption. The third ethical responsibility, which earlier speaker has very rightly pointed out, it's lies at supply side with businesses, not to hoard, not to overprice, and not to get involved in malpractices. And then there is a fourth ethical responsibility as well, which is on all of us, and I'm referring to floods, the flood-affected people of Pakistan. We're talking of 33 million population, which is equal to the combined population of Netherlands, Belgium, and Denmark. So it's the three European countries we are talking about when we are talking of the flood-affected communities. And in this era of trouble, which World Bank in its regional economic outlook, it said once in a lifetime catastrophe, and which the UN General Secretary during his visit to Pakistan said the climate carnage. It's our ethical responsibility to think of flood survivors and think of ways and means through which their essential life supplies has to be maintained. There are still around 8 million people who are displaced. Out of those 8 million, only 600,000 are in shelter camps. So we're talking of 7.4 million people under open sky, surrounded by water. And while winter is fast approaching, they have to brave this winter. They have to brave the possible heat waves soon after winter and possible monsoon next year. And we also know that we should not expect anything from international community. Our development partners and the bilateral development lenders, they have their own problems to address. So they are not going to give us anything. And that is the type of era in which we are entering to. On top of it, there would be food insecurity situation. Pakistan would miss the wheat production target very badly in the next wheat sowing season, mainly due to 9.5 million acres of land which is submerged under water in Sindh. So sowing would not be possible on most of that land. So we need to, all of us, be we part of government, be we part of consumer, or part of businesses, we need to keep ourselves reminding of our ethical responsibilities, ethical duties, and collectively we have to work for rehabilitation and recovery of our brethren and sisters who are affected by this flood catastrophe.
Thank you. Very articulately elaborated, Abid. If I could also ask Ehsan to respond to this question.
Okay, so I think Abid and Naz have really teed up the ball very well. I just need to keep it going. I think the point, Mehvish, that you also made was that inflation is not only a Pakistan issue, it's a global issue. And I think you must have all heard that in Europe, particularly in UK, they're talking about consumers having to make a choice between heating and eating. So it's going to be as bad as that, even in a country like UK. Now, we know that inflation is a significantly higher level in Pakistan. And so perhaps one should look at some of the macro issues that are leading to this. I think some of the less than macro issues have already been talked about, things like manipulation and hoarding on the supply side, and of course, the need to conserve consumption, whether it's energy or whatever, on the demand side. But I mean, just to make the point that inflation is just a consequence of an imbalance between supply and demand. And it's not per se a bad thing, because the inflation is a mechanism to try and bridge the gap between demand and supply under normal circumstances. However, it becomes an acute problem in a country like Pakistan, where inflation happens to impact the essentials, primarily the food items. So if you just look at the agricultural part of it, I would say that, of course, hoarding is unethical. However, one has to go a little, a bit higher and examine why do we end up allowing people to manipulate supplies. And I think there the question is that, is it ethical to allow an environment to perpetuate which actually leads to that? So the intermediation of earthies that come in, the control that they have on the farmers, and therefore the control that they have on the supply side, the fact that the government does not have enough transparency on inventory, whether it is quantity or location, and indeed even the quality in terms of storage. So all that actually impedes the supply side. So I think that's something that needs to be looked at. I think Naz touched upon energy, and I think here we need to be very clear that, of course, very rightly she mentioned that we import a lot of energy and therefore devaluation impacts. But that aside, I think the fuel mix that we've been using hasn't really been appropriate. The legacy arrangements that we have with the power generators are not ideal from a consumer's point of view in terms of the excess capacity that we've allowed them to install, and we have to pay for that. The fact that there are transmission and distribution losses, they all lead to a higher cost. And what does not help is IMF stepping in and saying that the only way to cure your circular debt is to raise the tariff. Now that is actually trying to cure the symptoms. It is not curing the fundamental flaws. So this is again something that leads to inflation. So I think these are some of the things. Now, going back to agriculture, one of the reasons on the supply side that impacts pricing is the fact that even districts don't allow movement outside their districts. Provinces don't allow the movement of crops within Pakistan to another province. Yet smugglers are able to take it to our adjoining countries. Yeah. So again, the physical controls, etc., those are extremely weak, and we allow that to happen. And this is not something that has only happened in this year or last year. It has been happening for decades now. So I think those are the fundamental issues that we need to contend to if we're going to have any hope in trying to balance supply and demand. I'll just stop with that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ehsan. And with that, I would just make one comment. Listening to all of your responses, this just is indicating towards a classic clash of capitalism versus socialism. And what is more appropriate today is a question that we really need to ask of ourselves. Is it Because while it's an opportunity for capitalists, but is that the right thing to do today? So with that, I will just quickly move on to the next question, which I would like to direct towards Abrar as well as Abid. The question is, what are the practical and ethical challenges inflation is presenting to businesses in Pakistan today? Also, what are the implications of inflation for sustainable development? It kind of leads on from the previous discussion as well. So, Abrar, we can start with you.
Thank you, Mehvish. I guess when you look at what are the practical challenges to a business, a couple of those are very obvious. The first one being that by virtue of inflation and the whole supply demand challenge, the demand starts to slow down. If that starts to slow down, so obviously that comes and impacts the P&L of the businesses. If that impacts your P&L, you've got your shareholders to manage. There are certain return expectations. So if that happens, how do you go out and try and strike a balance between the shareholders' expectations and doing the right thing by the employees, who are equal stakeholders in a way, but who are not the shareholders in the organization? So what do you do with them? That's one real big challenge, practical challenge that you start to see. Another thing that you start to see happening is obviously that the money starts to get parked in more of non-productive sectors. So people start to kind of, parking money in plots and lands and real estate, etc., which is again a non-productive sector of the economy, and that starts to suck more money out of the more productive side of the economy. So that also then starts to kind of add more fuel to the whole fire itself. In terms of the other ethical challenges that you see is, as you start looking at the P&L side, do you retain your employees? Do you go for downsizing? Do you go for salary freeze? Do you go out and give people some short-term increases, because obviously inflation is a reality and you can see that people are getting impacted. But then as a business, you're facing the uncertainty around the inflation that will drive on your input side. So how do you strike that balance? Couple of things that we have tried to do at our end are that we are very supportive and encouraging people to work from home, so that at least we can reduce their commute cost and save them some time. We, at least in our organization in HBL, we have done an in-house ride-sharing application that we developed, made that available to our staff. And which is surprising to see, there are a few thousand staff, and not just in large cities, in small remote towns, who have signed up for that, and they are actively using that ride-sharing to at least share the cost of the fuel that is required to come to the office. And then the kind of comments that we hear when we talk to the staff that, they're saving 30,000 rupees, 20,000 rupees, 40,000 rupees a month. That is a sizable amount for most of the people in any organization. You can look at going out and trying to figure out, do you offer more flexi hours to people? Because in these times, there are lots of people, at least, for example, in the bank, who are working on the technology side or looking to do some kind of other freelance activity. So do you offer them more flexi working hours, so that if they want to supplement their income and they can spare a couple of hours to do something else as well on the side? Should you do that? Should you not do that? And these are not easy answers, but these are some of the ethical challenges that you face every single day. And it's not easy every other day when somebody walks up to you and they say, we've got to leave, we're looking to move to Dubai, we're looking to move to Middle East. We know that the money will be good, may not be having really a really good cost, standard of living compared to that market over there, but it is literally becoming unsustainable for us here, which then means you're more and more looking at a brain drain that is coming in. That brain drain then translates into the quality of employees that you will have in your organization, which then again would translate into the long-term sustainability of the business model that you have. So, I think it's an ongoing challenge. We're all struggling with it. I'm not sure if we have any right answer, but that's where we are. Thank you.
Thanks, Abrar. Dr. Abid, would you like to add something to this?
Yes, thank you. I think there is this cyclical relation between inflation and some of the counter-inflation measures, and I'm talking of monetary policy. Of course, one of the easy things that State Bank would try to do when inflation would increase is to increase the policy rate. And we know that the increasing policy rate in case of Pakistan, where most of the inflation is imported and cost push, that's not the solution. But the State Bank would, of course, in a challenge to maintain a balance between value of rupee versus dollar vis-a-vis the inflation, would tend to increase policy rate, and this policy rate increase would in turn lead to more inflation. That is one. When one looks at the government's response in the run-up to election, of course, governments would like to somehow provide relief if they can manage some sort of waiver from IMF, or if they can manage some sort of assurance from their bilateral lenders. And that sort of fiscal policy easing, that in turn would lead to more spending, that would lead to more imports, spending of dollars. And after election, whoever would form the government would have to face the two chronic challenges, rupee deficit and dollar deficit, fiscal deficit and current account deficit. So we are in a very particular situation where we were back in 2017 when before elections, Shahid Khaqan Abbasi Sahab and Miftah Ismail, after the successful completion of IMF program, they went on a spending spree. So now one has to look at in this political uncertainty, in the time of need when one really needs to spend on flood effects, and in this time when, according to the Economist's index, Pakistan is the third country with the third highest inflation. So after Egypt and Argentina, whose inflation crossed 80% plus, Pakistan's inflation is at third, and then comes all the rest of the countries. So we have to somehow find the way to break this vicious cycle, and this vicious cycle would remain a challenge for businesses, for private sector, as well as for small and medium entrepreneurs.
Thank you, Dr. Abid. Ayla, would you like to add something to this?
Thank you, Mehvish. This is an absolutely solution-oriented discussion, and we should be having more of these. And I think if we take all our important discourses so seriously, we can definitely come up with very important sort of pathways of how to solve the challenges that we face right in front of us. So talking about the dilemma that businesses face in a scenario like high inflation, I believe one of the fundamental things is that the businesses should look at a long-term view rather than a short-term view. I know that it's not always easy, but looking at the scale and growth is very important. While, of course, managing the expectations of all stakeholders, which include the shareholders, the sponsors, at the same time, the people working in organizations, as well as consumers, etc., everyone. Because if businesses take a short-term view, they may be taking decisions which probably like increasing prices, which sort of impact further sort of passing on the impact of the inflation. And we understand that in a country like Pakistan, the poor is disproportionately challenged and impacted. So looking at the overall scenario, there needs to be some kind of a balance that needs to be created. And also in terms of ethical consumption, that is what everyone should do. And I really like the point that Dr. Abid Suleri made. And while consumers need to look at the ethical consumption, businesses should also look at ethical consumption. And I'll also mention ethical consumption of the finance as well. I'll give you. I'll mention here one of the products that was issued during COVID time, the turf, and a lot of businesses that could otherwise afford, say, reasonably priced loans. They were the first ones to sort of go and sort of get those sort of there was nothing wrong with, say, they were sort of doing it probably all sort of within the domains of the policy and of course whatever was allowed. But it's just that from an ethical perspective, was it the best thing to do? It was rather looking inwards and not sort of looking at the giving the benefit out to everyone, to a larger stakeholder group, which also includes a consumer. Having said this, had those investments been made in areas like fixing our energy challenge, bringing down the cost, and then passing on to the consumer that kind of benefit, it certainly makes sense. In terms of the challenges that we have right in front of us, of course, energy and food prices are the biggest sort of challenges that we have. And I believe that while energy prices have been impacting us for long, as an outcome of this flood devastation, we have not yet actually seen the impact of food inflation. It's very unfortunate that we are a net food importing country. So I believe we need to sort of, there needs to be responsibility will not be the right word, but some kind of sort of sharing of the burden. That is what everybody should be looking at. And in order to lower down the cost, I think there is still an opportunity, and that is bringing efficiencies in whatever businesses are doing, whether it is lowering down the costs, making good investments. I know this is a high interest rate scenario, but those are the lines that businesses need to look at, and of course, supported by the right kind of policy. Increasing the policy rate in a country like Pakistan is not the only solution. We have a lot of data available to us, and what really needs to be done is that then at the same time, the state bank as a regulator has to have more independence. Those are some of the very critical points I would say that those are there. Everybody needs to really share the burden. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ayla. Indeed, some very important questions that you've raised here. My next question is to Naz as well as Abrar. What, in your view, would be the impact of inflation on business planning, budgeting, and strategy for businesses? Naz, if we could start with you.
Sure. So I think some very interesting points raised, and the points Abrar raised here are very valid because from a business perspective, when you have this kind of inflation, obviously you generally see a rise in interest rate, your cost of capital goes up. It makes investing very difficult. Many of your ventures don't cross hurdle rates. You don't know what the outlook is like. So, and when your risk-free rate starts hovering around 14, 15%, it just, money gets diverted and it ends up, as he said, in non-productive assets, whether it's gold or it's real estate, so which may be a good store of value, but they're non-productive assets. So, I mean, that's the first thing that starts happening. And the minute you sort of, this starts impeding growth and industrialization. And then that has an ongoing effect. You have lower taxation. I mean, you will not be able to collect as many taxes. It hits your fiscal side. So you get into that whole phase unless you actively sort of pull out of that and you invest. So that's the first thing that happens. And I think generally the focus moves away from growth to cost cutting. That's another thing that starts happening within companies as well, right? But then there is the ethical element over here as well, where we saw this time where the inflation, we saw such massive inflation at this point that then you start looking at stakeholders, right? And the stakeholders are not just your shareholders, the stakeholders are your employees, they are also your customers. So how do you walk that balance between all of them? So while you may want to not give any kind of increments, let's say, for example, because you can see very tough times ahead. You want to conserve cash. But at the same time, when you see that kind of inflation, you know that you have to put something out there to actually help people out, because people will not be able to survive in this kind of an environment. And you saw a lot of businesses step up and take that kind of, I mean, HPL was one of them. Several businesses actually did that. And that was a really, really important measure. So I think that was very heartening to see, because people could feel that pain and see that we have to be responsible about this. So that's where I think the ethical part comes out. The customer element also, how much can you sort of charge the customer, how much can you take from there? So I think these are all those questions that kind of sort of start coming up, and makes business planning and budgeting extremely difficult, and forecasting. So everything goes on a hold kind of holding pattern, which is never good for the economy or for the businesses.
Thank you, Naz. Before we move on to Abrar, I would just like to quickly share a little bit of a fact that I was reading in one of the McKinsey articles. And it indicated that companies like Hewlett-Packard and Target and Microsoft, these names were founded during downturns. And another interesting fact was that Target managed to blow its growth out of proportion during 2008 and 2020. These were the two downturn periods where Target grew the most. It was just able to invest into the downturn and create an opportunity out of it. Abrar, please, all yours.
Thank you, Mehvish. So I think the one word that comes to mind when you think of planning or strategy during high inflationary environment is uncertainty. And that uncertainty then drives lots of other things. There is uncertainty at the corporate end, there is uncertainty at the consumer end. So if the consumer is uncertain, the demand side gets impacted. If the corporate is uncertain, the supply side gets impacted. From a corporate perspective, I mean, we are right now in our budgeting cycle. It's the year end. And as a bank, for example, we run practically on technology. So all our hardware, all our servers, all our software, all their licenses, everything is dollar-based. So how do you price for that exchange rate uncertainty? And all of the inflation that comes with it, how do you price your products and services going forward? What do you plan for? How do you go out and look at your expansions or growth plans? I think these are some real challenges from an uncertainty that gets introduced into the whole planning cycle, because you really don't know. I mean, in any planning cycle, you do create multiple scenarios, but whatever scenarios we had created last year, they've all been thrown out a window this year because of the way things have moved. So where does that leave you as an organization from a planning perspective? And to add to the fuel, unfortunately, because of the whole flood situation, I mean, all the estimates are that another 10, 15, maybe 20 million people will fall below the poverty line. So if they were previously the consumers of some of the products that were being produced, and if they fall below a certain poverty line, so their consumption opportunity would go away. That means, again, further challenges from the production side. How do you plan for the production? What kind of productions do you plan for? What kind of supply side do you plan for? And when we've seen in COVID, when everybody just kind of decided to go on a hold, and then everybody started to come back, and we've seen massive inflation coming because of that, complete chaos that was caused because of that. So we're not completely out of that chaos, and now we're seeing this inflation completely going out of control. So how do you plan for that? So I think that the one word that continues to haunt businesses in such environment is uncertainty, practically around everything. And again, it's a constantly trying to strike a balance. Because like Ayla was saying, at least at an HBL, being the systemically important bank, being the largest financial institution, we're not here for the short run. We have been around for 80 years. We intend to be here for another 80 years at least. So we do have a long-term goal. But again, it's not probably that easy for a lot of small to mid-sized firms to have that kind of long-term view, because they just don't have deep enough pockets to sustain this kind of cycle. Thank you.
Indeed, indeed, there is a dilemma here. Indeed, you know, our challenges are dual here. We have a state of stagflation today, and not everybody has the luxury to invest in a downturn situation. But yeah, those who can afford to, and if they choose to, I think here's the opportunity. Given that, you know, there is so much that can be done even in a downturn situation like today. Moving on to our final question, which I would be directing towards Ayla as well as Ehsan. What role can professional accountants and finance professionals play in addressing the challenges and risks for the business world? What needs to be done to ensure that we make good ethical decisions in this difficult environment? Ayla, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Mehvish. So Mehvish, finance professional and accountants, they're really the custodians of, say, the fiscal strategy of an organization. And the role of finance is not just sort of managing numbers, but really sort of devising the strategy. And there's, of course, now with all the tools and information, data is very easily available. So in order to sort of plan for how to sort of manage the supply chains, because I think now it's become more and more crucial given the global shocks and the regional shocks, and of course what we have at the country level, that those sort of planning is done fairly in advance. And again, stressing the point of view that on different scenarios basis for short-term as well as long-term view. In terms of managing, of course, say the stakeholder expectation, I would say that is also a responsibility that would rest with the finance professionals. And at the same time, looking at the stakeholders in a larger context and from the perspective and from the lens of sustainability and climate change. And this is not something that has become sort of important now because of the scenario that we are in. I mean, we all know that in Pakistan, we've not been able to build climate resilient infrastructure. Yes, there is this catastrophe has happened because of global climate change, but a lot of responsibility lies with us. And it's not just the business of the state, the business of the government, but at the same time, the responsibility of each and every stakeholder who's part of the economic equation of the country. And I would take it back to the role of the finance professional, those who are responsible for devising the overall strategy. They must, at every node and at every point, responsibly understand and plan for that. What is the impact of all the actions that they take? What is the carbon emissions emitting from the way they are managing the supply chains, the way they're sort of managing their operations? And of course, at the same time, ensuring that there's well-being of everyone, including the first and foremost, the people. And second, I would say the planet. So I think overall, the finance professionals sort of have a huge amount of responsibility on their shoulders. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Ayla. Ehsan?
Okay, so there's very little I could add to what Ayla has already said. I just want to actually go back to some of the questions that got asked earlier, and if I could add my 2 pennies worth. I think Abid very validly mentioned that the policy rate is not necessarily the right solution for a cost push type of inflation. I want to actually make a further point to that. The policy rate only affects the formal sector. It is the only the formal sector that actually borrows, and within the formal sector, it is only the medium, or not even medium, it's really the larger companies that go and borrow. So when you raise the policy rate, you actually affect the most responsible part of your total business environment. And you know, I don't want to overgeneralize and say that all the people, all the large companies never create any inflationary tendencies, but bulk of the inflationary tendencies, the manipulation of the the supply side really comes from the informal sector. That's point number one. Point number two is that to the extent that policy rate is designed to quell the demand, there are better solutions available, and the State Bank of Pakistan does use them. So, for example, restrictions on how much you can lend to the auto sector, being one of them. Yeah, you raise the cash requirement of the or cash reserve requirements of the banks and so on. So there are better tools available. Policy rate is really a very wide broom that sweeps everybody, but mostly it is the people who borrow. The third factor I want to mention is that in the kind of environment that we are currently operating in, it is not just the inflation that is hitting businesses; it is also taxation. Who are now being subjected to higher taxation? It is the people who already pay taxes. So the super tax, the 13 sectors, banks, of course, have been subject to super tax, but now they're subject to a higher super tax. Yeah. So when this happens, at the end of the day, they've got to manage their returns to the shareholders. So what would they do? I mean, HBL is a standout in terms of responsibility, but every organization cannot afford to be like that. Yeah. There is an import crunch currently. What is happening as a result of the import crunch? People are laying people off. Organizations are laying people off. Thousands of people, and there are 101 large companies that belong to the PBC, and I can tell you that a lot of companies have laid off people. What that is going to do is going to reduce the disposable income. So you've got a double whammy now. You've got high inflation, low income. So that's not conducive. The other point I want to make is when a country loses sovereignty, it loses autonomy. We have a classic situation where the West, led by President Biden, is trying to drive down the cost of fuel. Yeah, it is trying to get Saudi Arabia to increase its fuel supplies. But what has Pakistan government done? It has actually gone and supported Saudi Arabia to continue with the limited production that it is doing. So this is a very unfortunate state of affairs that we find ourselves in. We've actually lost our autonomy, and there's a dire need to regain that. Just one final point: Sri Lanka. I think nobody's mentioned Sri Lanka, and I think we need to mention Sri Lanka. But I don't want to mention Sri Lanka in any other way, but to say that I know there's a multinational company in Sri Lanka, which, because Sri Lanka cannot afford to import and pay for goods, has decided to supply goods on 18 months deferred payment terms. However, what that is doing is it is driving out local competition. Bulk of its competition is local. They were market leaders. They're now going to be supermarket leaders, right? What happens then? Are they then going to behave in a predatory manner? Are they going to then take up prices? Or obviously they would have taken up prices already. So I think these are the kind of things that happen when you have a mismatch and when you lose liquidity and you lose solvency. Thank you. I think you're muted.
Sorry, yeah, I keep on getting unmuted. 1 second. So thank you so much, Ehsan. I actually have my first question from the audience will be towards you. So what is being asked of is that inflation is not affecting the world in a uniform way. Should there be a responsibility on countries and economies at a more privileged position to support others?
Okay, so obviously, I think the easy answer is yes, there should be. But actually, who are the most responsible, countries and companies? I mean, let's talk of countries. I mean, traditionally, we look to the developed world, right? That is Europe and USA. But Europe currently is caught up in Ukraine crisis. Yeah? As I mentioned, that they have a dilemma of are they going to be eating or eating in the winter? So I don't think that they have the capacity They may have the will, but they don't have the capacity to actually reach out and help. The second thing is, how would they potentially help? They themselves are actually reaching out and trying to get alternative supply sort of sources for fuel. And then they are really going to the countries that we import fuel from. So they are actually in the process driving up the price. So I think their ability to help is very limited.
Okay, so you've already declared them poor.
No, I'm saying they're unable to help.
Yeah, and then we have some opportunistic nations in the midst of this who refuse to increase their supply. Fair enough. So my next question is towards Dr. Abid. Dr. Abid, an audience question for you. How should the debt crisis be evaluated in the times of inflation from Pakistan's perspective? Naz, would you like to take up this question? Should I repeat the question?
Yes, please.
How should the debt crisis be evaluated in the times of inflation from a Pakistan perspective?
Oh, I mean, it's a tough position to be in. I mean, remember when you have inflation and your rates have gone up, obviously the biggest borrower in the country is the government itself, right? So it makes the situation worse for itself. It actually, and that's one of the reasons they've raised interest rates. So, I mean, I agree with Ehsan where he said, okay, why do you need this kind of interest rate? You can use many other tools. And I think they do it mainly to take care of the dollar, the rupee dollar. So to make the rupee more attractive, but then there are tools for that as well. You could probably have control. So I think it makes it very, very challenging for government because their own cost goes up significantly. It leaves very little fiscal space for them. Already our debt servicing is extremely high, so it's a huge challenge. So another reason to actually bring down those rates so that create some more fiscal space for themselves as well.
Thank you. The next question I will direct towards Abrar. A danger of modern obsession with data, facts, and figures is that it can disguise questions of ethics as questions of facts. What do you have to say about that?
I guess, one can't disagree with that question because, as they say, history is written by the conqueror. So similarly, data, you can play with data, you can look at data in any way, you can present it in any way. So at the end of the day, obviously it remains the ethical responsibility of the person presenting the data to make sure that they present the right perspective and to present the right analytics, depending upon who the audience is and whatever the data is being used for. But regardless of what we say, see, the reality at the end of the day is, if I'm doing some data analytics, I obviously have certain preconceived notions or some biases, and those biases are going to drive the way that I will be looking for some answers from that data. So unless the data could have a mind of its own and could do its own thinking and form its own opinion and speak for itself, I think at some levels there will always be a certain bias of the individual presenting the data, but it will always be a responsibility of the person to go out and try and make sure that they become as objective as possible, become as ethical as possible, especially if it starts to impact the lives of people around you, and if it starts to impact large-scale population around you, it becomes that much more important for the person managing the data, playing with the data to become more ethically responsible.
Thanks, Abrar. Ayla, the next question is for you. What can be the ways to improve awareness of our facts and figures so that the constituted opens up new space for ethical as well as political deliberation?
That's kind of like a difficult question to understand, honestly. So in terms of, say,
I guess, if I could just simplify this question for you, what it is asking, what the audience member is probably trying to ask is how to improve the awareness of usage of facts and figures so that there is, they are able to help with a political and ethical debate and deliberation better.
I think data, of course, is just one of the the input that we have, and now with all kind of tools available, it's for us how to most intelligently and using different scenario analysis, sort of do a analysis using that data and using that for right kind of strategy, right kind of decision making. And I think it's just that, I mean, it's just one of those things that are there, but how appropriately we use data is the right thing, and how we sort of intelligently use it, given the kind of challenges that we have, how to address that, how to sort of manage the stakeholder expectation, how to use those analysis to plan for a long term, in terms of course, at the same time addressing the immediate challenges as well. But again, at times, just having data is not enough in terms of, I mean, when we look at the risk assessments, there are many organizations who internally do their risk assessments. There are sort of lots of global, very credible work done around risk assessments as well. And depending on whatever the past data has been, there are lots of predictions made. But at the same time, then not always the risk planning is most accurate. So while we rely on data, there needs to be, of course, readiness to be ready for something that is not known. So I think that's what organizations and everybody should be looking at. I mean, I don't think, while at a very global scale, the talks of pandemics were happening, but this was not in like any business's risk planning strategy. So we need to sort of look at larger pieces of information and plan understanding our own dynamics. And of course, at the same time, staying ahead of what everybody else is doing with this ethical and moral responsibility that we need to work for the collective good of all our stakeholders, starting from our shareholders to everybody we sort of interact with in our financial or otherwise transactions. Yeah.
Mehvish, if I can just add, I think a good example of that was the way Pakistan dealt with COVID, right? And that was using data, and that was well done. The SARS program during that time, I think that was very well done, where they used, again, data, they used AI, and I think they continue to streamline that. So it's possible, and I think that's what you would like to see more and more of, and that gave credibility to that program as well.
No, absolutely, absolutely, very, very correctly put. I have two more questions. My question to the ACCA team is: do we have time? Should we proceed? Okay. Okay.
Yes, we have 5 minutes.
Okay, Dr. Abid, next question is for you. Contractionary monetary policy is more of a popular method for controlling inflation. The goal of a contractionary monetary policy is to reduce money supply within an economy by increasing interest rates. Okay, this helps slow economic growth by making credit more expensive, which reduces consumer and business spending. Do you think that might be the right solution for Pakistan as of now?
I think, as I said in the previous round, I don't agree with the approach that is taken. in order to tame inflation. This would work in the economies where a lot of spending is done on credit cards, on hire purchase agreements, on mortgage, type of spending where the consumer and the businesses, they're reliant on bank borrowing. And that works well where the demand is elastic. Now, in our case, the type of inflation that we are talking about is mostly inelastic. We are talking of energy, we are talking of food, unless and until we change our consumption patterns, both the consumers and Ayla rightly pointed out, the businesses, the demand remains inelastic. Now, with that inelastic demand and with very few consumers and businesses relying on actual bank borrowing, it just provides an excuse to many of the businesses to increase the prices when policy rate increases, because then they say that it's just like the increase in value of dollar. Even our onion seller and tomato seller, he would tell us that because dollar has gone up, so the vegetable prices are increasing. So I think we need to rethink how to tame and how to manage inflation in economies like Pakistan.
Thank you, Dr. Abid. Absolutely agree with you. And in fact, leading on from your last couple of statements, the last question I would request Naz and Ehsan to respond to. There are corporations that are making record profits in times of inflation. Is there a responsibility that falls on companies to compromise their bottom line to accommodate the consumers?
I'll let Ehsan go with that first, since he's been with the FMCG side.
Right. Okay. So whilst the companies are making large profits, they are also having to pay much higher taxes. As the point that we tried to make earlier, the additional tax burden has really gone on to the people who already pay lots of taxes. So first of all, forget the company for the time being. Look at the salaried people. It is the salaried people whose tax burden has gone up significantly. And then, of course, you've got the companies. The companies, because they now have to pay super tax, etc., are therefore under-rewarding the shareholders. So that is actually then limiting the spending power of the shareholders also. But having said that, it is a competitive world, and I don't think that there are monopolies that remain in Pakistan. And so, if the entire sector makes money, then there must be something that is fundamentally right for that sector to make that money, as long as there's no price collusion. So I would say yes, horses for courses. If there are sectors that are making super profit and are not being therefore checked in terms of competitive sort of pressure, then that should be addressed. But certainly the government of Pakistan does its bit to extract as much as it can from the limited number of people who are in the tax base.
And I'll just add to that and just say that, it's so while they may make a record profit here, it's generally not sustainable. It catches up with you. And I mean, he's right. So either there's something fundamentally right or there's something fundamentally wrong in that sector, where if that sector continues to make exorbitant profits, then there's either it's an oligopolistic structure or there's something else which is structurally, maybe not right in that sector, which then the government can always address through other means.
Thank you, everyone. And this marks the end of our today's panel discussion, a very cerebral discussion, I must say, and a lot of important points were made, and a lot of important observations regarding the choices that the businesses as well as government should be making today. And it leaves us with so many thoughts on what those choices should be and what the right thing to do today would be. And while keeping growth in mind and keeping a downturn as a small hiccup rather than a long-term here to stay kind of an event. With this, I would wrap up my discussion and hand over to the ACCA team.
Thank you very much, Mehvish, and thank you all the panelists for this exciting conversation. And indeed, we had some good questions as well, and very well covered by all the panelists. So with this, I will move towards the closing of this session. So the closing address will be by Taimur Behram Khan, who is on with us at this session. Taimur is working as Head of Business Development for the South Region at ACCA. So Taimur, over to you.
Thank you very much, and I will not take much time. Congratulations to everyone who has participated in this session and has gotten good value out of it. We had 4 very interesting sessions. The first session was on rethinking regulatory governance with an ESG lens. So in this session, the regulators briefed on how they were implementing new strategies to actually have ESG implementation in a better way within Pakistan. And along with this, there were a lot of examples of organizations which were transcending towards the net zero strategy. So this session was fantastic in that sense that the sustainability side of it was very well addressed in this session. The second session was about enabling Pakistan's digital transformation and ethics. It talked about how data has to be taken care of and has to be preserved in a way where you have controls and we are managing it in the right way. Businesses can evaporate if the proper controls are not in place. It has to be ethically managed. It has to be looked into how this sea of data is being managed right now. Another aspect which was very interesting was highlight of Web3. How will Pakistan survive the new digital language of Web3? Where would it find value and how would it survive that? So those conversations were fantastic. You can go and you can see those. It's on our Facebook page. Third session was on EdTech, ethics and EdTech, which empowering the sorry, just give me a minute. It's been a long day for everyone. Just give me a minute. So the third session was ethics and EdTech, supercharging careers in accountancy. This session was more about how the learning landscape has totally transformed because of technology and how technology is helping the the delivery of the education, the tuition providers, and also the students' side. From the development needs, this has really transformed everything. And the last session was about the session which has just been concluded, was on ethics and inflation. This session was all about how ethics has really transformed the whole, day-to-day businesses and the work environment. So these sessions are available on the Facebook. I would recommend everybody to go through those sessions. And I would like to lastly thank all the partners and all the panelists and all the moderators for these sessions. Thank you very much and hope to see you soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Taimur.
Thank you.
For briefly summarizing all the panel discussion conversations. So with this, we'll be signing off this session. So again, thank you very much to all the panelists for joining us. And those who are listening and have joined us for this session. For those who have missed the entire sessions, please visit our Facebook and LinkedIn pages to go through all and complete conversations. So with this, thank you very much and looking forward to see you in another exciting session. Take care. Allah Hafiz.